They called him the King, a man whose hips shook America into a frenzy and whose voice echoed through every radio from Memphis to Moscow. But on one quiet morning in 1977, Elvis Presley's kingdom crumbled, alone, behind the bathroom door at Graceland. Officially, the world was told it was a heart attack, but inside the Presley family, a very different story was whispered, one that would take decades to unravel. And the one person who would finally piece it together wasn't a doctor, a journalist, or a historian. It was his granddaughter, Riley Keough. Years after his death, Riley would stumble upon letters, diaries, and even hidden rooms that revealed what the world was never meant to know. The truth wasn't just tragic, it was devastating. And now, for the first time, we pull back the curtain on one of the most protected secrets in American music history. This is how Elvis Presley really died, and how Riley Keough uncovered the truth no one dared to tell her. August 16th, 1977. Date that fans still remember with a chill. On that day, inside the famously gated mansion of Graceland, Elvis Presley's life came to an abrupt and tragic end. In the early hours of the morning, Elvis wasn't sleeping, far from it. According to accounts from his fiancée Ginger Alden, Elvis had been restless all night. He read through spiritual books, popped multiple pills prescribed to help him rest, and spent time in the bathroom, where he would ultimately collapse. At 2:30 a.m., he was still awake. By 9:30 a.m., Ginger found him lying face down on the bathroom floor, cold and unresponsive. He was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital, where doctors attempted to revive him, but it was too late. Elvis was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. The world was told it was a heart attack, sudden, unfortunate, but natural. But almost nothing about that day was natural. According to reports later revealed, Elvis's body showed signs of prolonged drug use. His colon was found to be nearly twice the normal size, a side effect of the powerful painkillers and barbiturates he had been taking. Toxicology reports were quickly sealed, and the Presley estate did everything it could to downplay the rumors. They didn't want a scandal. They wanted to protect his legacy. But behind closed doors, those closest to Elvis were left with unanswered questions and mounting guilt. In the hours and days that followed Elvis's death, chaos took over Graceland. Family members were ushered in through side gates. Reporters camped outside, desperate for details. But inside, there was a palpable silence. No one was talking. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, immediately began working with the estate's legal team to protect Elvis's image. He ordered that the full autopsy report remain sealed for 50 years. The decision was controversial, but Vernon was adamant. He didn't want the world to remember his son for how he died. He wanted them to remember the music. But silence came at a cost. Lisa Marie Presley, just 9 years old at the time, had witnessed more than anyone realized. She had seen her father's decline up close, his erratic behavior, his isolation, the constant stream of pills, and she carried that trauma well into adulthood. It's no surprise then that Lisa Marie rarely spoke about her father's final days, even to her own daughter Riley. What Riley knew about Elvis growing up was carefully curated, stories about concerts, fans, and Graceland's glory. But the darker truth, that was kept locked away, until Riley started digging. To understand why Riley Keough became so determined to uncover her grandfather's truth, you have to understand who she is. Born in 1989 to Lisa Marie Presley and musician Danny Keough, Riley grew up in two worlds. On one side, the glamour of the Presley legacy, Graceland, tabloids, Hollywood red carpets. On the other, deep emotional scars that ran through her family like a fault line. Her parents divorced when she was 6. Her mother struggled publicly and privately with addiction and failed marriages. Riley found solace in acting, eventually, landing breakout roles in The Girlfriend Experience and Mad Max: Fury Road. But the further she stepped into fame, the more questions she began to have about the man behind her family's legacy. The man whose death still cast a shadow over every Presley conversation. Who was Elvis, really? And why did it feel like everyone was still so afraid to talk about how he died? It wasn't until Riley was in her early 20s that she began visiting Graceland, not as a tourist, but as family. Unlike fans, she had access to places the public would never see. Private rooms, attics, sealed-off hallways. And it was in those quiet corners that Riley first began to feel something wasn't right. She noticed inconsistencies in the stories her relatives told. One day, someone would say Elvis died peacefully in his sleep. Another day, it was an accident. But no one used the word overdose. No one mentioned the pills. Riley started asking questions, but answers were scarce. That's when she turned to the one thing the Presley family had in abundance: archives. Boxes upon boxes of letters, photographs, even old home videos stored in Graceland's lower levels. And that's where she found her first clue. Buried deep in an unmarked box was a letter from Elvis's longtime physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, nicknamed Dr. Nick. In the letter, dated just weeks after Elvis's death, Dr. Nick admitted to prescribing over 10,000 pills to Elvis in the final year of his life. Everything from amphetamines to barbiturates to painkillers. The letter wasn't meant for the public. It was written to Vernon, Elvis's father, as a way of explaining the situation and possibly protecting himself from legal consequences. Riley sat in silence as she read the words. Her hands shook. It was the first time she realized her grandfather may not have simply died of natural causes, but of neglect, addiction, and systemic failure. The king hadn't just fallen, he had been allowed to fall. The letter from Dr. Nick shattered the fairy tale. But for Riley Keough, it wasn't enough to just read about her grandfather's demise. She needed context. She needed to hear it from the one person who lived through it, her mother. Lisa Marie Presley had been silent for most of Riley's life about the exact details of Elvis's death. It wasn't just pain, it was guilt, trauma, and pressure. As Elvis's only child, Lisa had spent decades defending his image while trying to escape his shadow. So when Riley approached her, she didn't know what to expect. At first, Lisa Marie deflected. It was a different time, she said. No one understood the dangers back then, but Riley pushed. She asked directly, did Grandpa die from drugs? Was it an overdose? That's when Lisa Marie's composure broke. She told Riley about the chaos in the house, the constant doctors, the pill bottles hidden in drawers, under beds, behind mirrors. She said Elvis wasn't just sick. He was trapped by fame, by pain, by people who were too afraid to tell him no. And most heartbreakingly, Lisa admitted something that shook Riley to her core. I think he knew he was dying, Lisa whispered. He just didn't know how to stop it. Still haunted by her mother's words, Riley turned to the one person who had been with Elvis during his final hours, Ginger Alden, Elvis's last fiancée. In her 2014 memoir, Elvis and Ginger, Alden described that August morning in chilling detail. Elvis had gone to the bathroom with a book in hand, a scientific search for the face of Jesus. Hours passed. Ginger grew concerned. She knocked. No answer. When she finally opened the door, Elvis was face down on the carpet. He wasn't breathing. The description was stark, almost clinical. But what disturbed Riley wasn't just the moment of death. It was everything leading up to it. Ginger described Elvis's physical condition as frail, his behavior erratic, his sleep cycles inverted. He had become paranoid, suspicious, and increasingly dependent on pills just to function. Reading those words, Riley broke down. She later said in an interview, the part that hurt the most was realizing how lonely he must have been, how surrounded he was by people, but how little anyone could really reach him. It wasn't just a death, it was a slow disappearance of a father, a lover, a king, and Riley couldn't let that version of him fade into obscurity. Most fans who visit Graceland never see the upstairs. Elvis's private quarters, the bedroom, the bathroom where he died, are sealed off to the public, preserved exactly as they were in 1977. Few people are ever allowed up there, even family. But in a rare and private moment, Riley was granted access. Walking through the hall, she said it felt like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was as Elvis left it. The bed neatly made, his favorite chair still facing the window. And then the bathroom. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost claustrophobic. The carpet was still the same. The counters held neatly arranged toiletries, and yet the air was thick with unspoken grief. Riley stood there for nearly 10 minutes. Silent. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she later described the experience as the closest I've ever felt to him. Not the superstar, not the myth, but the man. Vulnerable, flawed, and forgotten in the moment that mattered most. From that day forward, she promised herself, his truth won't be buried with him. Riley Keough isn't just an actress. She's become something of a curator for the Presley legacy, protecting it, but also reshaping it. Instead of pretending Elvis was perfect, she has begun talking about his struggles. She's acknowledged his humanity, his flaws, his pain, and yes, his addiction. In 2022, Riley worked closely with the production team behind Elvis, the biopic directed by Baz Luhrmann and starring Austin Butler. While Riley didn't appear in the film, she gave input to ensure the story stayed grounded in reality, not just glitz and rhinestones. She also helped digitize personal archives, handwritten notes from Elvis, voice recordings, and rare home videos, some of which hint at the very isolation that plagued his final days. Even in interviews, Riley has made subtle references to her grandfather's mental health and the people who failed to intervene. She speaks with caution but clarity. Elvis was a deeply sensitive man, she once said, and I think sometimes the world forgets that. Just when Riley thought she had uncovered all there was to know, a startling discovery shifted everything once again. In 2023, while overseeing a preservation project at Graceland, a worker found a sealed panel behind a storage wall in the basement. It led to a hidden room, small, dark, and lined with boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, dozens of audio tapes, labeled only by date. Most were from 1976 and 1977, Elvis's final years. Riley, with the help of a sound engineer, began listening. What she found was shocking. Some tapes were rambling late-night monologues, Elvis recording himself, possibly for therapy or self-reflection. Others were private conversations with trusted friends, revealing his fears about dying young, about being forgotten forgotten, about not being able to breathe on stage without medication. In one tape, dated just 2 months before his death, Elvis says, "They say I'm the king, but I feel like a ghost. Like I've already left and nobody noticed." For Riley, that tape wasn't just a revelation, it was closure. It gave her a glimpse into her grandfather's mind in his final days, and more importantly, it allowed her to finally understand the man behind the myth. For years, Elvis Presley's death was cloaked in glamour and silence, a myth wrapped in gold records and tabloid headlines. But for Riley Keough, the real story was far more human and far more heartbreaking. She didn't set out to rewrite history, she just wanted to know the truth. What she found wasn't just about how Elvis died, it was about why: addiction, isolation, pressure, and a world that worshipped the icon but forgot the man. Riley once said in an interview, "It's not about exposing the pain, it's about understanding it, because that's how you honor someone's life, not by pretending it was perfect, but by telling the whole story." And now, after decades of silence, the whole story is finally coming to light, not from a headline, not from a memoir, but from his own granddaughter, who refused to let the king be buried with his secrets. If this story moved you, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and share this video, because the truth behind Elvis's final days isn't just about one man. It's a lesson on fame, family, and what happens when silence becomes more dangerous than honesty. And if you want to know what Riley discovered next inside Graceland, stay tuned, because this family's story is far from over.